Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm going to be your host for this morning's session. Just myself running this session with you again this week. So we're looking at continuing on from last week as well. We're looking at projects. This is part 2. We're going to be looking at recording costs and revenue within the projects module, and also recording those transactions in other areas as well. So we'll see how that integrates with the project records. Now, session should last around about 45 minutes. I'll try and stick to that. Sometimes we run over a bit, just depends how many questions we get. On the subject of questions, a little bit of housekeeping just before we get started. I'm sure most of you, I recognise quite a few of the names from last week. Most of you will have attended webinars before. Just in case you haven't, as usual, you don't need a microphone. If you've got one, it'll be muted automatically. You can't unmute yourself. So as usual, any questions, you need to pop them into the questions panel. Now, as it's just myself running the session with you today, you may need to bear with me here and there, depends how many we get. We had quite a few last week come in at the last minute, so try and get your questions in early if you've got any, and I will try and pick them up, and I will hang around for questions at the end as well. If anyone wants a copy of today's slides, there is the opportunity to download that as well. So do take that opportunity. I'll try and make them available afterwards as well. As usual, you will receive the email later today, so that will contain links so you can register for our upcoming webinars, and so you can watch recordings. So if you want a bit of a recap on what we've covered today, hopefully I'll manage to get that recording hosted by the time you get that. If not, it will be certainly by the end of today. That should be hosted for you. So if you missed last session or need a recap of that one as well, then that will be available for you as well. Okay, so this is what we're going to be covering in today's session. So a little bit of an introduction, almost like a little bit of a recap as well. We're then going to get stuck straight into the process of recording costs. So that's where we'll spend the majority of the time today. We'll look at obviously recording revenue as well. Very straightforward as well. Once you start recording one transaction, it's just having an understanding of where you enter the project information. So recording costs and recording revenue, we'll look at the ins and outs of those. We'll also pick up on importing as well, just in case anyone wants to go down that route. I don't want to spend too long on that, but we will try and cover it for you. And also corrections as well. So if you make a mistake, or maybe you forget to flag a transaction, or maybe you think, well, I've already entered these transactions, I haven't flagged them so far, I've now set up projects, you can go back and amend that. So allocating it to a project, or even removing it, and also amending things like the cost codes as well that we touched on last week. Just at the end, I'll explain more about the additional support, and if there are then any outstanding questions, I'll move on to them as well. Maybe got some other things to cover in the further support area as well, but that will be time permitting. Right, okay, so just as a bit of a recap on where we stand so far with regard to the project's webinar, we covered part 1 last Friday morning. That recording is already available. Part 2 is today, so we're looking at obviously costs and revenue. The recording should be available by the end of today if you need that one. And then part 3, we're running at the same time next week, so we're going to be looking at analysis and reports in that session. Again, that one should be haven't quite finished writing this session yet, but it should be, again, probably somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes. So if you aren't already, please get yourself registered. If you can't make it, again, the recordings will be made available for you afterwards. The link should be included in your follow-up email though, if you haven't yet registered. Right, today then, we're looking at that process of recording costs and revenue against your projects. So it's going to appear in sort of 2 areas as you enter those costs. So similar to customer records, supplier records, bank, nominal, even your product records. Within a project record, you will have that activity tab. So as you record your revenue and your costs against it, they will appear. So let's just have a quick look at that. We'll be in and out of that area throughout the session today as well. I'm going to start with almost like a blank company again today. Just, I don't want anything in the background to cause any confusion. So if we go into the projects module, I've got one project set up. So we can access that activity, and obviously we'll be touching on the analysis in a bit more detail in next week's session, but we can access the activity either going into the record, and first of all, you've got the analysis tab. So you're going to get totals of things like your costs. Obviously, your variance will change as well if you've entered budgets in, and also your billing totals will change, and your revenue totals as well. That will change as we start entering transactions in the software. To see the individual transactions, you've got access to the activity. So again, as I mentioned, it's just going to show the transactions specific to this project. Looks a little bit different to some of the other areas. So customers, for instance, you will have different column headings. But we'll have a look at these as we start building transactions in the session today. So you can access it going into the record and choosing activity at the side here. Obviously, you've got reports available, but you can also go direct to the activity as well. So if you just click activity at the top, haven't got anything entered so far, but again, we'll come back to that a little bit later on, and it will just take you essentially into the record and display that the activity information for you. So nice and easy to see those transactions. Right, let's pop back to the slides. We're going to start getting stuck into recording transactions. So the first area that we're going to pick up on today is with regard to recording costs is in the suppliers area, so batch invoices, batch credits. Now it's really simple. You've got two additional columns that you need to complete if you want to link an invoice or a credit to a project, and it's just the project reference and the cost code columns. So just as you enter each transaction, if you want to link it, you've got to complete both fields. Obviously, if you don't complete any of the fields, it just posts the transaction just as normal. It wouldn't link to a specific project, but you've got to complete both of them. Otherwise, you would get an error if you are wanting to link it to a project. You can't just enter a project reference only, for instance. Now, if you have no need for this as well, you might think, well, actually, invoices and credits on the purchase side, I'm not going to link them to projects. Then you can actually hide that column, as you can do with a number of the other columns as well, and just means you're not tabbing or clicking past that when you're entering transactions. Let's have a quick look at it though. So back to my screen, we'll pop into the suppliers ledger, and I'll just pick on this one today. This concept stationery supplies, doesn't really matter what they are, and we'll go into batch invoice. Just make sure I've got the right screen share there. I do, yep. And it's picked up that supplier that I've selected. Obviously, if you need to change it, you just click drop down and select it from the list, but we'll just use that first one. Pop in your date. Obviously, by default, it's going to pick up today's date. Your due date, it's going to look at the payment terms on the supplier record. You can override that there as well if needed. Reference, normally you'd pop in something like an invoice number. Extra reference, that's a field for yourself, that one. It's not really any guidance on that one for the extra reference. It's just an additional field that you can record information in. Now that might be like if you've got an internal like a purchase order number, for instance, you might have popped that in there, some sort of other reference. It's really whatever you want to pop in there. Nominal code, I'll just use the defaults today. Again, I don't want to get bogged down in too much detail today. So choose the appropriate nominal code for the purchase. Department, again, it'll pick up a default, you'll be able to change it. But the two important columns are these two, the project reference and the cost code. Now you can type them in, so if you're tabbing into the field, you can just type it, or like the other ones as well, if you click on the drop down, you'll be able to select it from the list. You've got quick search in here as well, just in case, obviously over time, if you've got hundreds of projects, so if you've got hundreds of projects, you could type in something to try and filter that list to find it a bit easier for you. So anyway, we'll just select that one, choose the cost codes. I've tried to simplify this. I don't want too many distractions on that list. where you'll maybe think, oh, what about me? What should I do? And you go drifting off and maybe not paying attention to what we're talking about. So you're thinking about how maybe you could apply it or why I've done a certain thing. So I've just kept them really, really simple in today's session. Now I'm just going to say that's labour in the details. I'm just going to call it services. Oh, I'll try and type that right. Typing's not on point today. So services, and we'll say that's £1,000 plus VAT. And that's all I need to do to link this specific invoice to that particular project, and obviously choose the appropriate cost code. Now, if I hadn't chosen a cost code there, and I try to save it, it'll tell me invalid or missing cost code. So we'll just go back and we'll pop that back in. So we'll save it, that's it done. Credits, batch credits, pretty much the same. You've got those, again, you've got those columns there. Just a case of filling those in if needed, as and when. Now, just quickly going back to that batch invoice screen, I mentioned there, if you don't specifically use a particular field, so maybe, let's say you don't use department analysis within your software. So you can right click any of your column headings and it will show you which ones you can show or hide. So if you didn't use departments, we can hide that column and it will retain that setting for you. So again, if you don't use, when we're looking at the session today, if you don't use and you're not likely to record a project reference or cost code in a certain screen, you can always hide it. So you can right click, switch it off. Obviously, you want to switch both of them off. So project reference and cost code. And if we just close out of that and then come back in, you'll see it retains the setting. So if you're looking and you're thinking, actually, I've got project switched on, but it's not giving me that choice. So Michael's saying I should have it. Why haven't I got it? I'm on the professional level. I've got projects enabled. Why can't I see that? Probably just it's been switched off at some point. So again, just right click. You can see the ones that you can show or hide. So we'll just switch them all back on. So I could tick them, or alternatively, I just go back to using the defaults and it resets those columns for me. Right, let's just clear that and we'll close out. Now going back to the project. So we'll have a look at this project and see what's happened at that point. So if I highlight that one and go into activity, this is the one that wouldn't let me in just a moment ago. We'll see the information that's included for it. Now, it's got two transaction numbers, this one that we've just entered. The one that you would associate in your normal sort of nominal ledger, your transactions list. So when you go into this screen, this is what you would term your audit trail. So your list of transactions that impact on your customers, your suppliers, and obviously your nominal ledger. So this is essentially your audit trail number. Within projects though, the transactions are given their own number as well. So because I've not entered anything so far, I've got project transaction 1, but it's also it's audit trail number 1 as well. So be careful when you're looking at that. You might look at that and think, well, actually it's transaction 275. And you might go away to go and edit that one if you've made a mistake, but actually it's the audit number that you would be looking at. So it's got your standard sort of details in there that you would expect. Obviously, print that list, send it to Excel. We're going to be covering reporting in more detail next week. Credits, it would work in pretty much the same way. If we go into the record itself, nothing changes on the details tab. Obviously, we've got the activity we've just looked at, just another way of accessing that. And the only other thing that changes is on the analysis, and we're starting to see some movement now. So you can see the things like profit to date has been updated, outstanding to bill, we haven't recorded any revenue yet. And then we've got things like last costs as well. So we got the total in there. And actually we'll be touching on this bit a little bit later, the actual cost and committed cost. So actual cost, with us having a value there, I can click on this little icon, this little arrow icon, and it will take me through, and I can start analysing that and seeing where the breakdown comes from. Right. Right, question just there about if there's already been a supplier invoice done some time ago that you know is for a project, maybe you didn't record it at the time, can you add this to the project afterwards? Yes, absolutely. We will be covering that one a little bit later on. So if you've already entered an invoice into the software and you weren't using projects at the time, but you are now, or you're about to, you can go and edit those transactions and assign it to a project. So we'll be covering that in the corrections section towards the end of the session. Any questions on purchase invoices or credits? Do keep your questions coming. You may, as I say, you may need to bear with me a little bit here and there because it is just myself running the session with you. But we will try and cover as many as we can. And if I don't get them answered during the session, I'll pop an email to you later on today. Right, okay, we'll move on then. We'll look at the next area for recording costs, which is the bank area. So we're going to look at specifically, we're going to look at the bank payment option. Now, there are three types of payment transaction that you may see in the software. You may never even notice this, and indeed you might actually only ever see a BP with regard to bank payments. But there are three transactions which potentially can be generated via the bank payment option. There's the BP, a VP, and a CP. And that is just dependent on your type of bank account. So we'll touch on that in a moment. Again, when you come to enter bank payment transactions, you've got the two additional columns available to you, the project reference and the cost code. So really I suppose it's really no different to the way that you would have entered a batch invoice. Right, let's have a look at that then. So again, back to my screen. We'll close out of the record and we'll pop into the bank accounts area. Now, with regard to whether it's a BP, a VP, or a CP, as I mentioned, it relates to the bank account type. So what do I mean by that? Well, if I go into a bank record, you've got the account type here. There are three types of account you can have. You can have it set up as what you would term a check account. Now, when you post a transaction from a bank account using the bank payment option, and the bank account itself is flagged as a check account, it will post the payment with the type BP. If you've got it flagged as a cash account, which you might be familiar with, you may have seen that one. When you post a BP from an account that's flagged as a cash account, it's going to show as a CP, a cash payment. And then the final one there, credit card account. So when you post a payment using an account that's flagged as one of those, it would show as a VP, a Visa payment. Oh, that's the long-winded description of it. So ours is just flagged as a check account. Now, those transaction types they're working exactly the same way. So they're distinguished because of the account type. That's the only difference. But something to watch out for, good little tip this one, is when you go to run the likes of reports within the bank area, if you run something like a bank payments report, let's see if I can find one. Actually, they may have changed recently, but you used to get, and this may depend on your version as well, you may find you've got daybook bank payments. If you come from an older version as well, you may find you've still got loads of older reports. So you may find that you've got a daybook bank payments report, a daybook cash payments report, and also a daybook credit card payments report or Visa payment report. So if you're looking for your reports, do check, make sure it's picking up the right information for you. So watch out for that one. Anyway, we'll come back to bank payments. So mine, because I've got quite a low resolution on my laptop today, just to make things a little bit bigger for you, I get this sort of grouped icon here. So I click the bottom part where it's got the arrow, payments. It will give me the relevant payment options. So I'm going to choose bank payment. And so obviously pull through the relevant bank account. I'll just leave it as today's date. I'll pop a reference in. Let's put my initials in today. And nominal code. It doesn't really matter. Again, it doesn't really matter what it is. So I'll stick to basics. You've got your department. And then again, just like with invoices, you've got the project reference and the cost code. So if it does relate to a project, you can easily select them from the menus. I'll choose materials this time. We'll just pop in a value. We'll see if VAT is applicable in this case, so it works out that. And then we'll save it. But again, it's literally that simple. If we go back to the project record, into the records, into the activity, and then again, we've got that BP transaction. So equally, that could be a VP or a CP, depending on that account type. And just like with the invoice area, when we looked at that, when you go back to bank accounts, into the payments area again, if we right click on any of the column headings, you can see which ones we can show or hide. So if you don't want to specify a department, or you always want it to accept the default department in the background, you could always hide that, so you don't see it. Again, you must complete both columns though if you want to link that expense, that cost, to a specific project. Miguel, we'll come back to your question. I'll pick that up a little bit later with regard to amending and adding in the project and cost codes to the transactions afterwards. You wouldn't be able to use import for that specific option. Import is used to add new transactions. You can't update existing transactions. So it would mean sifting through the transactions one at a time, the ones that you need to link to a specific project. We will try and pick that up when we come to the corrections and the importing section of the webinar though. Right. A quick question from Warren as well. Why would you pay straight from the bank and not from the supplier account? That would go for any other transaction as well. So it might just be a miscellaneous expense where you don't have a supplier record set up. So an expense where you've not been invoiced for it. So in that case, you would just go straight into the banking area and show that as a basic expense. You know, where maybe you don't want to set a supplier record up for it. You just want to show that expense going straight out. Just saves you enter one transaction rather than enter two, an invoice followed by a supplier payment. Right, anyway, let's move on and we'll get stuck into, I suppose, what I would term is part of the more complicated side of the cost side. And it's to do with recording costs within the product and services area. And also this links very closely if you're using the purchase orders area as well. But we're going to touch on purchase orders after this section. So in products and services, we can assign costs in a number of different ways. One is where we've got stock and maybe we've got that stock booked in and it's not necessarily specific, it was never ordered specifically for a project. It's just let's say we had 10 pallets of bricks and we want to assign one of those pallets or a couple of those pallets to a specific job. So we take them out of stock essentially, and we assign them to the project itself. So that cost would be recorded. Now that's just a movement of the stock. It doesn't change anything with regard to your nominal ledger. And the adjustment in option would be, let's say you take too much out of stock and you've got some left over when you finish the project, you just want to book that back in. So essentially reducing your costs. There's also allocations as well. So let's say you do hold a stock of certain materials, for instance, you might want to reserve that. So allocate it to a particular project, so it'll reserve it. So we'll touch on that as well. And that links in, the allocations bit links in very closely with purchase orders. So we're going to look at how you can allocate that as well. Right, back to my screen. Let's clear that and we'll close out. So in products and services, I've got a couple of products. I'll just quickly pop some into stock. So we'll just quickly do an adjustment in first of all for these widgets. I'll date that to sometime in March as well. I'll ignore the project reference and the cost code for the time being. I'll see I've got 10 of those in stock. Cost price is 100. I've got my sales price set to 250. So we'll just book those into stock. So I've got something almost like to play with at this stage. Now let's say these widgets, let's say I need to take, let's say 3 of those out of stock. I'm going to take them out of stock to use on a particular project. So to do that, I would use the adjustment out option. So enter your product code. Obviously it'll bring through the details, pop in your date. I'll pop in yesterday's date just so we can differentiate with some of the other transactions I'm going to post. I'll pop in a reference. Can't even get my initials right today. There we go. And then again, for this adjustment out, we want to assign this to a particular project. So we'll choose that one and we'll choose materials. I want to take 3 out of stock. And obviously I could continue entering more as well if I needed to. But I just want to essentially take 3 out of stock at this point and assign that to a project. So you can see for that one, we had 10 in stock and our quantity in stock has just now gone down to 7. So if I go into the product record itself, I'll see that on the activity. I'll see that adjustment out transaction. As far as the project is concerned, let's have a look at that one. If we go and have a look at, we'll just pop into the record. So analysis wise, we can see the actual costs have increased. Obviously this figure up here is increased as well. And if we have a look at the activity, we'll see we've got that AO transaction on there. So the adjustment out transaction. We've got the associated cost, 300, a unit of 3. And this time, one thing to note is that it doesn't have an audit trail number. So that transaction, just the movement of stock within my accounts, it doesn't affect my nominal ledger at all. This transaction appears on essentially the project record and the product activity itself, but generally it doesn't affect a customer, a supplier, a nominal account, or the bank account. It's just we're using some of that stock. We want to assign the cost of that stock to a particular project. So that's the AO transaction. So it doesn't have an audit number. It's got a project transaction number, but not an audit trail number. Now on a similar theme, if we go back to products and services, you've got the adjustment in options. So of those 3, let's say we use 2 of them. Maybe we overestimated. We want to use 2 of them. So actually we want to return one of those widgets back into stock. So this is where we use the adjustment in option. I'll just use today's date for this one. Give it a reference, and again, project reference, and then we'll use the relevant cost code as well. Quantity, I just want to return 1 back into stock, and then I'll save it. Right, again, you can see we've now got 8 back in stock. And if we go back to projects, have a look at the activity, you can see we've got project transaction number 4, but again, it doesn't have an audit trail number. So essentially it's a project only transaction. So May, your question there, can you just confirm that AO or AI, does that not affect the nominal code? Not at all. I could actually do anything within the, so if I went into the products, for instance, and I just adjusted some stock in manually, that would have no bearing on the nominal ledger. So it's not as such linked. So I could increase the value of my products within the products and services ledger by whatever value, and that doesn't automatically feed through to the relevant nominal code itself. That you would do that normally by posting opening and closing stock journals. That's something that we cover in a separate webinar. It's maybe something that you would do as part of maybe a month end or year end. But there is a webinar recording on opening and closing stock. Adi, you mentioned there as well, just with regard to the departments. Obviously, it's recorded the transactions against the department. I'm not going to get bogged down with departments today, which is why I've just accepted the defaults. If you want to change them, yeah, you can do that. Right. Final bit I want to cover just in this area for now is the allocations option. So if we go to products and services, you've got an allocations option here. So let's say I've got 8 in stock, which you can see I've got quantity 8 in stock. It says free stock 8 as well. So let's say I want to reserve a quantity of 2 against my project for future use. So I know it's in stock, and I just want to allocate them, to essentially reserve them. So what I can do is I can go into allocations. I want to choose allocate stock, choose whichever product it is, pop in a reference if you've got one, and then again, I would just be a case of choosing the relevant project and also choosing the cost code. I'll say I want to reserve 2 of those. Close out. You can see that we've still got 8 in stock, but actually the free stock is reduced to 6 at this point. Now that doesn't appear at that stage because all we've done is we've just reserved some stock at that point. So if we go back into projects, have a look at the activity, no additional transaction has been posted at this point, no additional cost. However, because we've reserved that stock, we've allocated it, we've reserved it, we know we're going to be using that for the actual, for the project itself, what it will do within the project record, if we go into the analysis area, it will have increased our committed costs, so costs that we know we're going to be incurring. So that's all to do with stock allocations, that one. Now that £200 will transfer and become an actual cost when we issue that allocated stock to the project. So essentially we book it out of stock and say, right, we're now using that on the project itself. So it will transfer from a committed to an actual. Now, if you go back to products and services, and let's say, yeah, we're now ready to take, let's say, those 2 items out of stock for use on the project, whatever it is, all we would do is go into allocations, and then issue the allocations. So we'll choose the project. Obviously, you can use filter by product code or project reference. If I filter by project reference, I can see all of the stock that's currently allocated to it. Shows me of these widgets, I've got 2 allocated, and I'm going to say, right, actually, I want to take both of them out of stock now. So quantity issue, I'll say 2. That's it done. You can now see quantity in stocks reduced to 6, free stocks 6 as well. And if we go back to projects, into the activity, you'll see we've now got another adjustment out transaction. So it's got that quantity of 2 in there. So saying £200, and if we go back to the record itself, on that analysis tab, you can see that the committed cost is now 0, and that cost will have been transferred across to the actual cost because it's now on the activity of that specific project itself. So that's how you would do it manually with regard to stock and allocating it. You've also got purchase orders though. So I'm going to pick up on that next. But again, please keep your questions coming if you've got any. So purchase orders, when you come to enter a purchase order, if you do use the purchase orders option, you can enter project details at order level, which is the information that's sort of in the top right-hand corner when you're entering a purchase order. But you can also amend it and override that to item line level. So when you drill down to edit an item line, you'll see that in a moment. And you can override that and say, right, well, actually this item, I just want to assign it to this particular project or this specific cost code. So you can do that. Now, with regard to purchase orders, we'll try and show you the different status and delivered as well, and how it impacts on, or how it doesn't impact on the activity, but when it shows as committed costs, what the stock shows like, etc. So let's quickly pop into purchase orders. Close out the record, into purchase orders. We'll do a new one. And we'll see it's for this specific supplier. Now, if the whole purchase order that I am entering now relates to one specific project, I can just fill it in here at the top. So the project reference and the cost code. If it doesn't relate to one specific project, or you might be ordering some goods just to book into stock and it's got nothing to do with any projects at this point, then you would just leave this blank. You might be ordering goods or services from a supplier where actually it relates to a number of different projects. So you can do that. You just wouldn't fill in this section at the top. You would do it against the item lines themselves. Well, let's say that I want to order some more of those widgets. I'm going to order them specifically as well for this project. And I'll give it a cost code as well. So we'll choose widgets. Let's say I want to order 10 specifically for that. Pop in your price, etc. Let's calculate the relevant totals. Now, if you need to drill down and you need to change it, so if you're entering loads of different items and they're for different projects, or you want to assign them different cost codes, etc., then it's just a case of drilling down on the item line itself. So I clicked on that. Next to where it's got your description, the little arrow to the right-hand side of that field, if you click on that, and you can see against the item line, we've got the project reference and the cost code in there. So we can change it for per item line level. Now, one thing to note, just in case anyone's thinking about this, when I've ordered 10, if I needed to split those 10, let's say I was ordering a total of 10, but I was ordering, let's say, 6 for a specific project and 4 for another project, I need to enter those as separate lines on this one order. I can't just say the 10 and then assign it to 2 different projects. I've got to break it down. So that's something to bear in mind. I'll just knock all the discounts off as well, just to keep things a little bit simpler. So we got them there, and we can override it if required. So that's the 10 that I'm about to order. I'll save it, and I'll say, yes, I want to place that on order now. Do you want to print it? I'll not bother with that one at this stage. If you've not used purchase orders before, we do have a webinar booked in for next month. If you are interested, do get yourself signed up for that one. So that's on order. If we have a look at the project record at this stage and have a look at the activity, you'll see nothing else has been entered at this point. So the activity, we haven't posted another transaction to it. All we've done is we've ordered some stock, and it would show as a committed cost because we've placed that on order. Right, so going back to purchase orders, we'll say, right, we've now received those goods. And let's ask us, do you want to update stock and record delivery? So we'll click yes to that. We'll not bother printing it. So that purchase order as such is complete with regard to the stock. We've ordered it and we've received it. We've not been invoiced for it yet. We'll come back to that one in a moment. Now, if we pop into products and services, you can see that it's increased the quantity in stock by the 10 that we've just received from that new order that we've entered. You can see the free stock is 6, and that's because we've specifically ordered those 10 for a particular project. So when we're ready to use those, again, you're back to the allocations option. We're ready to issue that, and if I bring up that project, you'll see we've got 10 of those widgets currently allocated to this project. Let's say we want to use 6 of those on the project now. So amend the quantity to issue, save it. You can see the quantity in stock and the free stock's adjusted accordingly. If we now go back to projects, have a look at the activity, and you'll see the extra transactions now being entered there. So those 6 that I've just issued. So again, the associated cost of that is now being recorded against the project itself. Right, now I'm going to try and explain I suppose the more complicated little bit about the excuse me, about the purchase order side. Now, when you complete a purchase order, there is an update ledgers option. Some people will use that update ledgers option to essentially, it's a bit like if you enter an invoice into the invoices and credits, and then you update it to the ledgers to get that onto the customer's account. You've got a similar option for purchase orders. You've got an update ledgers option. Now, I would say with regard to purchase orders, it's probably a 50-50 split with regard to some people will use the update ledgers option to generate the invoice to pop it onto the supplier account. Others will just get that invoice from their supplier, and actually they'll just go into the supplier's area and they will enter that as a batch invoice. So you've got that 50-50 split. Now, if you've used a purchase order and you've reserved stock and you've essentially issued it to the project, when you come to enter the invoice, that cost has already been recorded against the project. That's because you've issued the stock to it. That's where the cost is. It's already on the activity. So if you use the update ledgers option, or you rather do it via a batch invoice within suppliers, when you come to enter that transaction, you would not allocate that to a project and cost code. Otherwise, you're going to be, as it mentions in the message there that potentially you would get, you would be double accounting for those items. So I'm going to show you where that message pops up. So quickly back to my screen. And we pop into purchase orders, highlight the one that we've entered. You've got the update ledgers option at the top. So you can see it automatically leaves the project reference and the cost code blank. If I go to update, it pops the information into the batch invoice. When I go to save it, because we've gone in via update ledgers, that's when this message appears. Now, it's nothing to worry about in this case. That's because I've left the project reference and the cost code blank. Don't be tempted to fill it in, or the cost of that stock, you would have just entered it twice against the project. One is the adjustment out transaction when we've issued that stock to the project, but also it would record that purchase invoice on the activity as well. So that's when you're double sort of counting that expense. So watch out for that one. Obviously, there's different scenarios in that as well. So I'll just click yes to that to post that transaction. So that's what that message, that will catch people out. Again, different scenarios. Linda, you mentioned there if there was a purchase order for a subcontractor, how would this work as you won't receive a delivery? So that one, if it's a subcontractor, it wouldn't really make much difference. You're probably not going to, if you go via update ledgers, you're going to get the message, but you're not going to sort of book the subcontractor into stock as such. So there's not going to be an issue of that subcontractor via the products and services menu. So you would essentially, you're just going to need to enter when you update ledgers, that's when you would assign it to the project and the relevant cost code. I'm going to come back to it a little bit later on. I'm just well aware of the time. I think I've underestimated how long this session will last, so I'm probably going to take another 10 minutes or so just to finish it off. Anyway, we'll pop back to the slides for the time being. Final bit I want to, cost-wise, that I want to cover with you today is project-only transactions. So there are two options within the projects module. There's charges and there's credits. So this is where you need to assign a charge or assign a credit to a project where it's going to be an internal charge. So let's say you employ project managers. They get a salary or whatever, but you want to charge them out to the actual project. So you want to see that, that you want to charge almost their time almost, and so you can calculate things like profitability and monitor costs, etc. against that. So that's where charges come in. It's a project only transaction. So I'm just going to quickly run through that one as well. Let's pop back to my screen. We're going to go into projects. Really simple option, this one. So let's say I've got an internal charge that I want to put against this project. So nice and easy to complete. I choose the project. I'll just accept today's date. Again, I can pop in a reference. I'll just say project manager as the detail. Now resource, I'm going to come back to that one in a second. For now, I just want to say, right, I want to assign this cost. I want to assign it to this specific cost code. And I'm going to charge, say, 1 day of project managing. I want to do that at a rate of, let's say, £300, just as an example. So we'll save that one. And if we go and have a look at the activity, you'll see we've got a CD transaction. So it's a project only charge, this one. No audit trail number. We're just assigning a cost or a charge to the project itself. The other one, obviously, if let's say we'd assigned a project manager for, let's say we charge them out at sort of daily and we've done 5 days, it might be that actually we only needed that project manager for 3 days. So we then go and we would issue that project only credit for 2 days back. So again, it would reduce the costs accordingly. Now, the other one to be aware of is the resources option. So when we entered the charge, there was that resource column. And the idea of this resources, if we just close out of this screen and pop into resources, is that we can set things up. So we don't want to sit there with a calculator each and every time. We want to almost like set up a cost list. Now, it might be types of labor that you set up. It might be certain machinery that you pop in the daily rate that you charge that machine as. It could literally be anything. It would save you having to get out, looking it up or sitting there with your calculator trying to key it in. So if, for instance, I want to add one, and I'll just call it, let's say PM. So I'm going to charge out project manager. I'm going to say it's a daily rate. The cost is 300. So that's what I charge a project manager out as, and I want to assign that to the relevant cost code. So I set that up. It's almost a bit like a price list for your products almost. So we got that set up there. Now that means we've now got that available for use. So when we go into charges or credits, we can see right against this project, that date, pop in a reference, and we can get into the resource area. So I choose that, project manager. You'll see it brings through the rate automatically. So I'm not having to sit and work that out or look that up or in any shape or form. That's what we charge them out at. And I want to say, right, I'm going to do a daily, 3 more days I want to charge for. It's a daily rate, this one. So that's the rate. I can override the rate at that point, but it's set up as a resource just so it pulls it through automatically, and I can then save it. And again, that's it done. No limit on the number of resources, records that you can set up. Just sort of makes it a little bit easier and helps you to avoid mistakes. Now, all of the information I am covering today, it is available in our help center, so do be aware of that one just in case you need a bit more detail on what I cover. I'm going to quickly cover revenue next. Now, again, with revenue, the only thing that's any different is you link it to a project only. There's no such thing as a cost code for the revenue. So you can enter revenue in a few different areas. One is obviously customers. As a batch invoice, batch credit, you've got those 2 additional columns again. Bank accounts, when you're entering a bank receipt. So just money coming in where you haven't invoiced and you want to record that against a specific project. So again, you might just want to record that. So again, you've got those 2 additional columns. The difference is when it comes to invoices and credits. Now I'm going to show you trying to think of the word. Let's say the detail. Can't pronounce intricacies. So we'll show you the detail in invoices and credits. So how you can record that. So back to my screen. We'll choose invoices and credits. We'll choose new. Now I've got mine set to a product invoice. We'll choose a customer. Now against a normal product, if we're not actually invoicing for the products themselves. So although we might have used X number of widgets, that would be all we're going to be invoicing for the service itself or the project itself. We're not invoicing for the breakdown of materials or anything that's being used. It doesn't go to that level of detail. So actually, if we drill down on the item, there's nowhere against the item that you can enter a specific project. The only time that you can record that is if you use an S3 code. Now, an S3 code is used for, it means that you can use it on a product invoice, and it's where you're charging for a service. So when you're doing that and you drill down on the item line, it means that you can link in your charge for the service itself against the project. Let's call it, pop in some text, and I'll see I'm charging at this stage, we'll say £5,000. I'm going to say, we'll say that's stage 1 as well. So we'll just okay that. The other place you can record revenue within invoicing, just okay that. The other place you can record projects is when you do an invoice and you do a service invoice. So when you're typing in your details, I'll just say this one's garage stage 2 this time. When we drill down, you can see again, we can specify a project. So within invoices and credits, if you're doing a product invoice, you record the revenue against an S3 item. That's the only place you can do it. Or if it's a service, you'll have this project option against all of their various item lines. So we'll just okay that, save it. Right, I'll quickly update this one to the ledgers. I'll close it. And if we just pop back into projects, have a look at the activity, and you'll see we've got the SI on there. So it's project transaction number 11, audit trail number 4. So recording revenue, it's actually quite straightforward. A couple of other things to quickly mention. I'm not going to run through and demonstrate these ones for you, but I'll quickly mention it anyway. So you can import transactions as well. Now you can import transactions relating to projects in 3 key areas. One is when you're importing audit trail transactions. So when you're importing the likes of a purchase invoice or a purchase credit, you can link that to a project and a cost code. You can also import project-only transactions. So it might be you don't want to sit in there keying them in. You might just keep track of those on the likes of a spreadsheet and import that information. So your charge debits and your charge credits. And also stock transactions. Very unusual, that one, but it still is possible. I don't think I've ever come across anyone importing stock transactions and linking them to a project itself. But it is possible. So that's something to be aware of as well if you've built them up in the past and you just want to bring them in. Probably if you're going to use import, it's probably most likely you're going to use project-only transactions. That's the kind of transaction that you would import. But do be aware of what you've already entered in the various areas. Final thing I do want to mention with regard to the recording of costs and revenue in today's session is corrections. So I had a few questions about this earlier. What if you've entered transactions and you want to assign it, or maybe you have made a mistake, you can amend your transactions if required. So let's just quickly take an example back to my screen. We'll quickly cover that one. So if I pop into transactions, now it's got to be an audit trail transaction that you can amend. So it's got to be one within the transactions list. If it's a transaction just which is a project only transaction, so like a stock movement or one of those project only transactions, the charge or the debits, credits that we looked at, they've got to be done manually. But if it's an audit trail transaction, so let's say I've got this purchase invoice here, and it'll show me the detail. All we need to do is edit, find the relevant line. So we'll edit that one. And in here, we can We can assign that to a project and also a relevant cost code, and then just save the changes. So that transaction will now be linked to that specific project. Similarly, if we put it to the wrong one, or maybe we've developed our cost codes a bit more now, we want to change that, again, you can go in. So that very first one that we looked at the beginning, if I go in and I can edit that one, and I think actually it's gone to the right project, but actually I've chosen the wrong cost code, I can amend that. Similarly, if I wanted to unlink it, I can just delete the two contents there. Close out, save it. Do you wish to post these changes? Yes. And that transaction there is no longer linked to that project. So it would have removed it from the activity and adjusted the totals, etc. So Angel, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right there. That's how you would do that. You mentioned that one quite early on in the session. So if you've got older transactions, you've started using projects, and you want to assign those older transactions to your projects, you can do that. Something to be aware of. Right, what we'll do, if you've got any questions, what I would encourage you to do is just reply to your webinar emails, and I'll pick those up separate. I hadn't realised this webinar would last as long as it has. Maybe we need to break it down even further going forward. So we're going to end the webinar just at that point. Any questions, email them to me. Just reply to any of the webinar emails. I'll pick them up and get you an answer by the end of today. Remember, there's loads of information available for you within our help center. The recording will be available hopefully by the time you get that follow-up email. So if you need a bit of a recap on anything we've covered, you'll have that available. If you've got any thoughts on what we've covered today, though, because it's sort of a new session, or the new format of this session, then let me know. Pop it on the survey. If you take a minute to do that as you leave today's session, that'd be greatly appreciated. I think we probably, for this one, we've tried to squeeze too much content into the one session. So if any thoughts, ideas you want to share with us, do pop it on there. Follow-up email will be with you in round about an hour's time. I hope you can make it to next week's session, which is on Friday at 11, where we'll be covering analysis and reports. So we'll be picking up on a little bit of what we've touched on today with the costs, and obviously reporting on that as well, and what areas you've got within the software to start sort of, I suppose, analysing those projects in a bit more detail. Okay, so we'll end the webinar at that point. Many thanks for coming along. Again, any questions, get them emailed in. We'll try and pick those up today for you, or even next week if you think of anything in the meantime. Otherwise, take care, stay safe, have a great weekend, and hopefully we'll see you next Friday. Many thanks.